building systems for PDXLAN. Does anyone know what day it is?
Keep things smooth this fall. Platinum package. With the Lawnmower 4.0, you can leave the shredding to the sacks and not your skin, thanks to proprietary advanced skin-safe technology. And because it's IPX7 rated, the band can play on, whether it's rain or shine. Of course, it's not all about the solo. You gotta give your backup singers their moment to shine. The crop gel will give them the smooth harmony they're after, while the crop exfoliator won't have you playing Rhapsody in Blue. Take 5 and go to manscaped.com/craftcomputing to get 20% off, free international shipping, and 2 additional free gifts. That's manscaped.com/craftcomputing. And remember, your balls will thank you.
Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. So we are on a week-long quest to get everything ready for PDXLAN this Friday, and it brings us to system number 2 to build for the week. This one, hopefully, should be pretty straightforward. Now, the era of the LAN party rig, I think, is well and truly dead. Everyone has full-size desktops anymore, even though there's a pretty distinct lack of PCI Express expandability on most consumer motherboards. See my previous review of the all-new Raptor-like Intel CPUs. But today we're gonna do an ITX build that you can take with you anywhere and should still get you the same performance as a fully fledged full-size desktop. This is going to be another Raptor-like build, this time featuring the Intel Core i5-13600K. Now again, this CPU was sent out by Intel specifically for this build, so huge shout out to them for supporting the channel. One of the goals of this system is to actually keep the overall budget fairly low, yet still get some top-flight gaming performance. So things like $1,000 graphics cards and even DDR5 memory aren't things that I considered for this build. Instead, we're going with a DDR4-based system using the Gigabyte Z690i Aorus motherboard. It's an ITX motherboard with an LGA 1700 socket supporting both Intel 12th and 13th gen CPUs, although to get it booting with a 13th gen CPU, it may require a BIOS update. We'll figure that one out here pretty soon. For the cooler, we're not going with anything exotic or even terribly crazy. We picked up a little small form factor unit from ID Cooling in the IS60 Evo. Now again, the goal of this build is to keep the budget fairly low, and at $50, this was a pretty affordable option. Now, we're not going for crazy overclocks or really anything beyond the out-of-the-box boost clocks on the 13600K. And I'm hoping that with the top-down cooler, number one, it'll keep that CPU nice and cool, but also we might get some added benefit of the air blowing into the motherboard, cooling the VRM, and keeping our memory in check as well. Since I've mentioned the memory twice, let's go ahead and cover that next. I'm going back into my archives and pulling out my Viper SteelSeries memory. Now this is a 16GB dual-channel kit of DDR4 4400 MHz, which is some of the fastest DDR4 that's available. I'm hoping the DDR4 controller on that 3600K is up to the task of this fairly quick memory. That, and we're not going to be losing a lot of speed as compared to something like 5200 MHz DDR5. And finally, the elephant in the room. Yes, it does exist, and I can't wait to give this a shot. This is the Intel Arc A770 Special Edition. This is their 16GB Premier graphics card that they just released officially about 3 months ago, but I finally got my hands on one thanks to Microcenter. This is Intel's all-new flagship GPU with 16GB of GDDR6, and at only $350, you should actually get performance approaching an RTX 2080. Not too shabby for their first time out of the gate. Storage might be the one area we did go a little bit beyond the standard budget of a system like this with the Lexar NM980 Pro. This is a 2TB NVMe Gen 4 drive, but with read and write speeds of up to 7,500 megabytes per second, it should be able to keep all the other components in this system fed with data. Last but not least, what are we going to put all of this goodness into? Well, case of the year for 2021 was probably the Fractal Design Torrent, and as luck would have it, just a couple months ago, they came out with an all-new Torrent Nano, which is an ITX-based variant. So I could think of no better landable PC case than a mini version of the case of the year from last year. I think that's all the parts out of the way. If I missed anything, Rhett will correct me in editing. No, we won't. And let's get all this together. All right, build this. I'm gonna go take a nap. You want a PC built in a day? I'll build you a PC in a day. But Gigabyte is not making it easy. So booted up the PC, really no problems. I did have to update the BIOS, which did require me to put in a 12th gen CPU. Little bit of an annoyance. In fact, this seemed to have a pre-production BIOS on it, according to the website. It was version F1, and the earliest available version for download was F3. This motherboard is now on F20. So we've jumped up quite a few revisions, and hey, 13th gen now boots. So just something to keep in mind if you're buying this for a 13th gen CPU, you might have a little difficulty because you need a 12th gen CPU to boot first before it'll support the new BIOS. But that minor complaint of mine aside, since I happen to have a 12th gen CPU, went to install Windows and it says no NVMe drives have been found, which I found very curious because there's definitely one in there. However, the way Gigabyte designed this board is your M.2 slot is on a riser daughter board on top of the main motherboard. Now, normally that's not a problem because pretty much every other configuration of board that I've seen with this setup, they will pass ancillary power through to the NVMe drive and all the other accessory peripherals like your fans and RGB lighting. It seems if you want to use M.2, you're required to plug in ancillary power to that daughter board though. And that's provided by this old school floppy drive Molex connector. But now, why does it sound like I'm irritated by the fact that I need to plug in ancillary power? Well, the only cable that they provide you is a floppy to Molex adapter. It's 2022. I can't remember the last time I needed a Molex plug for anything besides a water pump, and even those I'm starting to get a little frustrated with. But good God almighty, NVMe in an ITX build requires a floppy Molex, and the only adapter they give you isn't even SATA. Page 21 on the manual, external power. Connect one end of the external power cable to the connector on the other end to your power supply. We'll do that, and hopefully we have NVMe. A feature I didn't think we needed back in the days of Molex. All right, we are finally up and running with this build. A couple of things tried to give us a little bit of difficulty there towards the end, but overall I think I am very happy and this will be a fantastic system to take to the LAN. Let's go and talk about a couple of the individual components and some of the issues that I had, and whether or not I would change anything if I built this system again. Starting off with the Fractal Design Torrent Nano. Now again, I love the full-size version of this case in the Torrent. Again, I use it for my streaming PC pretty much as my daily driver here around the office. This one I did have a couple of very, very minute criticisms of. Mainly around the power supply and cable routing inside the system. Now, I don't remember having these same criticisms of the full-size Torrent, but with the power supply on top in this ITX system, and with the position of the built-in cable management on the backside of the PC, it did mean my graphics card run was just a little bit short. I was not able to use the built-in cable management or the cable ties and run the GPU power supply plugs all the way around the bottom to the GPU. So while the full-size Torrent was very easy to cable manage and turned out fantastic with very little effort, the back of this one reminds me of some very early PCs that I built, as it's a little bit of a spaghetti mess. I might be able to zip tie this into some semblance of looking decent, but if you want this to be a show quality PC or something you're very proud of inside and out, regardless of the angle that you look at it, some power supply extensions or even some custom power supply cables might be on the docket for you. The biggest headache of this build, though, was probably the Gigabyte Z690i motherboard. Now that it's up and running, I really don't have a lot of complaints about it, but when you're starting to see a lot of other manufacturers, especially of the top tier chipsets, the Z690, Z790, and the X670 chipsets, with integrated BIOS flashback, or the ability to flash a BIOS without having a CPU installed in it, this one let me down a little bit because I needed a 12th gen Intel CPU to boot up the system for the first time to update the BIOS in order to run the Raptor Lake CPU. That's something that I don't think we as consumers should be needing to deal with in 2022. There's no reason in the world OEMs of these motherboards and chipsets can't provide you a bootable environment, or at the very least, a way to flash directly from a USB key without having a compatible CPU installed. As far as the overall layout of the motherboard, I don't really have any major complaints. We'll get to that in a sec. Everything is pretty much where you would expect it to be as far as fan headers, addressable lighting, all of your power supply connections, front I/O. It's all pretty standard. I do have an issue with some of the non-standard plugs that are required to use this motherboard, though. The only fan headers on this motherboard that are standard 4-pin PWM are one for the CPU and one for a chassis fan. But there are a total of 5 fan headers on this board. 3 of them, though, require little breakout dongles, so if you're fine running that dongle life on your laptop, well, I've never had to do that same thing on an ITX motherboard before, but here we are. And the headaches with little nitpicky stuff like that really don't stop there either. There's the aforementioned 4-pin Molex power adapter that's required for the primary M.2 NVMe drive to work in the system. You also can't use the heatsink and beauty plate on the top of the motherboard unless you have an NVMe drive with a bare PCB. And I don't know of many people who are buying Z690 and Z790 chipset motherboards that aren't also spending premium money on NVMe drives that include their own heatsinks. So it's kind of an odd choice to require what are essentially lower-end NVMe drives for your board when you're fetching a premium price point. Given that I'm using a Lexar NM980 Pro and it already has a pretty beefy heatsink on it, I just left off the heatsink that was included with the Z690i motherboard. It doesn't look the greatest, but I don't think it would look any worse if I added it. So yeah, just something to keep in mind when you're shopping for components for a build with this particular board. Now there is a second M.2 NVMe slot around the rear of the board, which is pretty standard placement for a lot of ITX systems. But part of me also can't get over the fact that the primary M.2 is on a daughter board that requires 4-pin Molex power, and they don't even give you the decency of including a SATA power adapter with it. So what should have been a very clean power supply build with just EPS, PCI Express, and a 24-pin adapter, I wound up needing to use a Molex header on the Fractal Design power supply just to run my NVMe drive. A little bit more of that dongle life. Last but not least, let's talk about the Intel i5-13600K. And can I just say, I'm pretty much over the moon with 13th generation Intel at this point, and it is definitely the shot that they needed to get competitive again with AMD Ryzen. This CPU is a 12-core, 20-threaded unit with 6 performance cores and 8 efficiency cores. And when you're just looking at the bare numbers, it's easy to get kind of lost between performance and efficiency, but let me just say, in both single-threaded and multi-threaded, this CPU is an absolute juggernaut. 5.1 GHz boost out of the box without even touching it. The DDR4 memory is running at 4400 MTS just by enabling XMP. There was no special configuration needed on that. And Cinebench numbers. I did run a very brief benchmark. Cinebench R23, this scored a 23,732 in multi-threaded and a 2,011 in single-threaded performance. That nearly beats a Ryzen 5950X, which is a 16-core, 32-thread unit. As far as gaming performance goes, I haven't had any appreciable amount of time to spend in games. I've just ran a couple basic benchmarks. I am definitely looking forward to what this thing can do once we take it to PDXLAN and let it stretch its legs, though. And along those same lines, I'm not going to give any opinions one way or the other on the Intel Arc A770, at least in this video. This is a brand new platform from a new manufacturer to the graphics card space, and I think it would be disingenuous to say anything positive or negative about it without actually spending some quality time getting to know this new architecture. Now, as far as my impressions and the reviews and benchmarks that I've seen, people are fairly impressed with DirectX 12 and Vulkan performance on the A770, but there seems to be a little bit of a difficulty when running DirectX 11 and earlier titles. This is definitely something that I want to take a very close look at and something that I may have a solution for. So if you're interested in my overall review of this card and a possible solution to some earlier API improvements, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss that one. But I think that's going to do it for today's video. Once again, a huge thanks to Microcenter for sending out some of the parts in today's video. Microcenter is the place where you can get all your PC parts under one roof, and at Microcenter, Black Friday starts early. They're helping you beat the lines with their Black Friday sales event going on November 7th through 27th. Check out their amazing deals in-store from CPU and motherboard bundles to desktops and laptops. You won't see in-store exclusives like this anywhere else, so head down to your nearest Microcenter to get your deals today. If you like this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Twitter while it still exists at Craft Computing for daily shenanigans like this. And if you like the content you see on this video and want to help support me in the things that I do, consider joining the Patreon. Link is down in the video description. That's going to do it for me in this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, everyone. I'm going to get some sleep before I have to build the next PC.